Hey everyone, thanks for joining today's session. It's the first in our cool webinar series, almost a cool conference, our cool webinar series. The topic of today's session is taking steps towards ADA compliance in online courses. This is going to be a panel discussion with James Gibson, Kim Calips, Melinda Walters, and Pam Duncan, who will introduce themselves at the beginning of the session. To start with, if you're new to Blackboard Collaborate, we want to make sure you're fully engaged in today's session. In the bottom right-hand corner, you'll see a purple arrow icon. Click on that, and that'll open up a new window on your right-hand side. There will be 4 icons at the bottom of that new window. We want to make sure you're clicking on the farthest left icon, which is a little chat bubble. That will enter the chat area. We would like you to put any questions or comments you have into that area, and we will address them as the presentation proceeds. Also, in the bottom middle of the screen, you'll see 4 additional icons. There will be a little man with his hand in the air. We want to make sure if you have a question that you would like to express vocally, to go ahead and click that, and we will get to you as soon as we can in the middle of the presentation when we get to a break. There's 2 more additional icons we'd like to talk about in the middle. The second from the left will be either a microphone or a telephone icon, depending on how you access the audio for today's session. We want to make sure that you have a slash through that by clicking on that. We want to make sure that the audio is not interfering with the presentation. And if you have a question you'd like to vocalize, we'll have you click that again to activate your audio. We'd also like to ask that you have your webcam deactivated, that's the icon, that's the third from the left. It's a little camera. That way we're not accessing your video camera as we're doing today's presentation. And if there aren't any questions before, we'll go ahead and get started, and I'll hand this over to Kim Calips.
Thank you, Chad. Good morning, everyone. So thank you for joining us for our very first COOL webinar. COOL, spelled with a K, stands for KCTCS, Optimizing Online Learning. And this is a professional development series that is sponsored by the KCTCS Office of Distance Learning. I will be moderating today, and I recently joined the Office of Online Learning as an online learning manager. I've just been in this role since this past November, so right at 3 months. Very much still learning, very much still doing a needs assessment to get a sense of what kind of professional development is most valuable to faculty. And I'm really excited to have you all here as sort of my beta testers for the way we are doing this webinar. Everyone should have gotten a link to a mini course last week prior to the webinar that provides a lot of information about some specific steps you can take towards making your courses more accessible and ADA compliant. And then today we're going to have some discussion with a great panel. And this is also a great opportunity for you all to share with us what you need to be able to do your job better. So great opportunity for learning all around. During the webinar itself, our panelists will share some thoughts and tips, and then we will have a chance for Q&A. So hold your questions. You can feel free to type them in the chat. You can feel free during the Q&A to ask them, but in general, we'll kind of save anything that's not immediately necessary to help you all understand what's going on for that Q&A session. The webinar will end today at 11, but that's not the last you'll hear from me. In a couple of weeks, I'm going to be following up with you all because part of this webinar involves some very specific calls to action that we're going to suggest that you all give a try. And I would just like to follow up to see what happened, what you've done, what you haven't done, what's gotten in the way, what's been helpful. So you all will be hearing from me pretty soon on that. Okay, so the goals of this course are to improve the accessibility of your online course materials using Blackboard Ally, to build pro-accessibility habits one step at a time, and to provide feedback on what PD and other supports you need going forward to make your online courses more accessible. Okay, with all of that said, I am going to start by introducing our panel, or actually asking them to introduce themselves, give their name, where they work, and what they do. So Pam, let's start with you.
Hi everyone, it's good to see a lot of names that are familiar, and for those that aren't, hello to you electronically. I'm Pam Duncan. I am Deputy General Counsel for KCTCS. I work here in the system office, but provide legal assistance to everyone in the system.
Thanks, Pam. Okay, let's go on to James.
Hey, good morning. My name's James Gibson. I work at the System Office in Versailles in the Technology Solutions Department. I'm the Learning System Administrator for KCTCS, and my job is to support all aspects of Blackboard Learn, from performance to integration to end-user support.
Thank you, James. Okay, how about Mindy?
Hello, my name is Melinda Walters. Most people call me Mindy. I work at Hazard Community and Technical College. I'm an instructional designer in academic affairs, and basically I work with faculty to support design and development of online courses.
Awesome, thanks, Mindy. And we are super glad to have our panel here. This is our entire panel, just a list of them, so you have the names in front of you. And we're going to start this thing, or continue this thing, we've already started, with some discussion. We have various questions. Some of these will be for the whole panel. Some of these will be for specific panelists, and some of these will be for you all in the audience. So I'm going to start with a question for the entire panel, and that's just, what are the benefits of making our online courses accessible?
I'll jump in here and answer that question from a risk management perspective. So of course, everything that we do for our students. But we also don't want our students to be in an adversarial position with us. We want them to be able to access their courses appropriately. And if they cannot, they might very well file a complaint with the Office of Civil Rights, which we would then need to answer. And often that will cause us to go into, after investigation, go into what is called a monitoring consent decree, in which the college would have to, for a period of 2 to 3 years, if not longer, continue to answer questions regarding accessibility for the OCR. So we want to stay out of any legal realm in helping our students.
Thanks, Pam. James or Mindy, do you have anything that you would like to add there?
Yeah, sure. One aspect that sometimes I think is forgotten, that accessible content improves the experience for all learners. For example, learners benefit from captions on videos so they can see the spelling of new vocabulary. Other students learning a new vocabulary in a technical class can benefit from those captions as well. Students may be prone to eye strain, or may be an auditory learner. So tools like Blackboard Ally, students can listen to an audio format of the file that you upload, or use HTML or EPUB formats for easier reading on mobile devices. So I think everyone benefits from a course that is presented in a logical and consistent manner.
Awesome, thank you.
I can just second that. I think focusing on making sure our content is accessible improves the quality of learning for all students.
Great, thank you, Mindy. So I want to go on into a question that is, this one I'm going to direct specifically to Pam. And it is that, you know, online accessibility and ADA compliance have always been important. These laws have been in place for a long time. But why does this seem to be such a hot topic right now? It seems like we're just hearing more about the necessity.
Well, you know, I like to, when I talk to the colleges, talk about how we're here to help people marry practicalities with legalities. And really, a lot of what is driving this is the change in education and how we, what technologies we use. So back in the dark ages when I went to college, we didn't have a course management system like Blackboard. So there wasn't really a need to consider online accessibility because most of our courses were face-to-face. Now what we have are a variety of different technologies, and it's really becoming the norm and not some sort of anomaly to have electronic methods of presenting content. In addition to the changes in the practicalities and how we educate instead of face-to-face, we also have changes in the law. So the law, really ADA is now ADAAA. And ADAAA is the Americans with Disabilities Act Amendment Act. And under ADAAA, we don't really even argue with whether somebody has a disability when we're arguing whether they need an accommodation, because the definition of disability has been expanded so greatly. So when someone comes in, and that's not to say we can't require certification from a doctor of this disability, but when someone comes in and they say that they have a disability, then we go ahead and determine what is a reasonable accommodation. For online accessibility, we have moved toward universal design and toward following all of these guidelines in order to be compliant with the ADA. So the reason it's a hot topic is really the world is changing, education is changing, and people are demanding that just like face-to-face accommodations, they have online accommodations as well.
Great, thank you very much. Okay, let's switch gears just a little bit, and I am actually going to do a quick little poll here just to see who has already used Blackboard Ally. So I've popped a poll onto our screen, so let's see if you've used Blackboard Ally or not. We've got about, I don't know, a third of participants have already jumped on here, which is awesome. And let's just keep going. Okay. Got about 20 more people who haven't responded. I know a handful of those are actually moderators, so, and then we've got a handful of people responding in the chat. So, okay, it looks like we're right about half and half in terms of people who have responded, who have already used Ally versus those who haven't. So I'm going to go ahead and I will just end the polling now. And James, this is a question for you. So what is Blackboard Ally and how can faculty use it to make their courses more accessible?
All right. Well, if I can, I'm going to show my screen so I can talk about it and also show off the tool a little bit, if that's all right.
Awesome. That would be great.
Okay, can you see my desktop?
Can indeed, yes.
Okay, yeah. Great. So Ally is a remediation tool to help you create more accessible files. Ally is integrated with Blackboard Learn to offer guidance and improve accessibility, and Ally will automatically check for accessibility issues, and it also generates alternative accessible formats for students as well. So Ally itself measures accessibility of each file attached to your course and shows you at a glance how it scores. So those scores will range from low to perfect. The higher the score, the fewer the issues. And Blackboard uses gauge icons to measure your file's accessibility. So we've got a gauge that's next to all of the content that you create. So a red gauge shows that the file is not accessible and needs immediate attention. There's a yellow to orange looking gauge, which is medium, so the file is somewhat accessible, could use improvement. Then there's 2 levels of green. So there's high, which means that the file is accessible but could be improved. And then there is perfect. So the file is accessible, there's no improvement that's needed to that file. So once you select a file score, let me grab this one. A panel opens to show the score value along with information of the file accessibility. You'll be able to learn about accessibility issues, why they matter, and how to fix them. For accessible files, Ally tells you what you've done correctly, and for files that are not accessible, Ally shows issues within the document and shows how to fix the problem. So Ally might prompt you to add additional information or upload resources to make the file more user-friendly. So some of those issues, some common things that you could find are untagged PDFs, missing descriptions on images, or contrast issues. So if we look at this file, it states that this document does not have headings. So we can jump in to see what exactly that means. And also how to add headings. So if we click into this, we can see it'll give us some options.
We're not seeing your screen anymore.
Oh, okay. Let me try again. Thanks for letting me know.
Yeah. Okay, that's good. It's
Okay.
back.
Okay, great,
Thank you,
thanks.
sir.
Okay. Okay, so let me back up. So we're looking at a particular file here, and whenever I've opened it up with Ally, it's stating that this file does not have headings. So if we need to figure out what that means, we can click on what does this mean? And it'll go through and give us an explanation on a heading isn't always a heading, and gives us a little bit of background information on what the problem is. Then we can click how to add headings, and we can pick, so this particular file is a Word document, so we can click Word for Microsoft Office, and it'll go through and give us a walkthrough on adding headings to the file. Once we add those headings to the file, we can back out, and from this area you can actually upload the file, and it'll overwrite the actual file with the problem.
Hey, James, this is Kim. It's showing your homepage, but it's not showing you actually in the course demoing Ally itself.
Oh, strange. Okay.
Happy Tuesday.
Yeah.
Like a Monday.
There we go.
There we go. Awesome. Thank you.
Maybe it just needed to be refreshed.
Okay, that's good.
Okay. Sorry about that. So again, here's your areas where you can click to figure out what it means to that the problem's occurring with the headings and how to add the headings to the file. So, and from this area as well, you can upload and it'll overwrite the actual file. If you don't have the original document, you can actually download the document from here. It doesn't really help with PDFs, but for Word documents, it works pretty well. So after you make your file more accessible, the accessibility score automatically updates on the file page. So, and currently, Ally checks PDF files, Microsoft Word files, PowerPoint, OpenOffice, uploaded HTML files, image files, and it will check YouTube videos as well. Excel and videos uploaded to the LMS and other types of files will be supported soon. Blackboard's continuously improving this product. So far, I've focused from the faculty's perspective, but let's take a look at the way that the files look from a student perspective. So I'm going to jump in under Student Preview and go to Content. So Ally automatically creates alternative formats of the file based on the original. So for example, if the original file is PDF, Ally creates audio, electronic braille, and EPUB formats of the same file. So students would get to this by clicking chevron to the right of the file, click for more options, and click alternative formats. And from here, students can download, that was a PDF, so they can download an HTML version, an EPUB version, electronic braille version, or the audio version of the file. So overall, the types of alternative files that can be generated. So for scanned documents, Blackboard will create an OCR version for optical character recognition. Tag PDFs for Word, PowerPoint, or open Office files. Semantic HTML. Audio, which comes in MP3. EPUB or electronic publications, which is supported by many different e-readers, or electronic braille. And that was a really quick look at Ally for Blackboard Learning.
Thanks, James. That was great. I want to direct you all over to the chat for just a second, where Paige has a response to Scott's question about how green is legal. And I'm just going to read this because probably, just in case not everybody is on the chat. Pam and I had a quick discussion. There aren't laws related to specific ADA design elements, but we want to ensure access. So we are ultimately striving for 100%. But in any legal issue, we could use this information to show we are continuing to approve ADA and access.
So, and let me jump in here. When we say there aren't laws, the Web Accessibility Guidelines, Content Guidelines, so the WACG, those are guidelines for federal and state government websites, and they're applicable to federal and government websites. They are not, it is not codified in statute or regulation that we must comply specifically with those content guidelines. However, we use those content guidelines as a means of being ADA accessible for our students. Students do not have to tell us that they have a disability. So if I were sitting out there and let's say that I had low vision, I'm not completely blind, but I have low vision capability, then if I decide that I don't want to make my faculty member aware of that, that's fine. I do not have to do that. And hence, if we make our courses accessible, then that's helpful to our students because they can continue to work and thrive without necessarily having to seek an accommodation. But if they do seek an accommodation, the standards that we are using for accessibility really, and I'm going to read these because I have them written down and I might not remember them all, but we want to make sure that they can acquire the same information, our disabled students, as our able-bodied students, that they can engage in the same interactions, that they can enjoy the same services, and that they can do so within the same types of time frames. So it's not going to be meaningful if by the end of the course we give them something that's accessible, because everybody else has had it for months. So that's kind of what you're looking at. So to say if something is 80% accessible, well, we can legally defend that because you've taken good faith measures to try and make it as accessible as possible. There might be an outlier out there who cannot access it, And then if they make it clear to us that their particular disability will not permit them to access an 80% accessible document, then we would have a duty at that time to take further measures to make it accessible to that student.
Thank you, Pam. So it looks like Scott is also wondering about, in terms of Blackboard, about Ally itself, that option to get alternative formats for files. And that's a really, really good question. My thought is that that information should be included at a minimum in the syllabus. James, do you have any additional thoughts on that?
Yeah, absolutely. I'm hoping to get that addressed here in the next couple of weeks. There's a student support tab in Blackboard, and has not the best information. It's served us well for the time being, but I'm currently working on redoing that support tab, and I've been working on a portion on allies, in particular for students. And I agree, a lot of students do not know it's there. And I think a lot of students would love the opportunity to listen to the audio format of the file, especially if it's a large PDF. So hoping to get that out in the next week to 2 weeks.
Awesome, thank you. And I mean, really, at this point, this is just a question of what we do going forward. I mean, this is something that's being made available. We obviously can't go back in the past and change what's been told at this point. I am, during the course of this entire webinar, and pretty much in the course of my entire professional life, making notes about some of the things to build into our PD opportunities, our student and faculty supports, and this one is definitely duly noted. So thank you, Scott, for that.
And I would like to add something about accessibility, disability services, and online versus face-to-face courses. The process for requesting an accommodation is no different in online courses than it is in face-to-face courses. So if I need extra time, if I need to go to the testing center, all of those things, I can request those, and that request goes through disability services. And generally, the syllabi for our courses will include some sort of disability services statement. If you are already listed as a student who has received in the past accommodations, then most disability services offices will send out an email at the beginning of the semester to say, just a friendly reminder, don't forget that you need to make a request for an accommodation again. Those disability accommodations should go through the Disability Services Office, and the instructor will get notification of what those are. At that time, then there will be compliance with those, so there should be. As far as online content goes, if we can avoid a student needing to request an accommodation, that's what we're after, is to make it as timely and accessible as possible for our online content. And so that's what we're talking about. It may be that the content isn't the issue. It may be that the technology is the issue. So they may need some sort of reader, or they may need a special computer software program. So we need to gauge which is it, technology or content, when we're considering what the student needs. They may need both. And then the other issue is, what do you do if a student's been in your class for 3 months and then suddenly says, oh, by the way, none of your documents were accessible? And you go back and you find that maybe some of them were and some of them weren't. Well, we are not required necessarily to retroactively give accessibility or accommodations for accessibility. However, we are tasked with knowing whether our content is accessible. And so you should, at the very beginning, check your content each time you're putting it up and make sure it's as accessible as possible so that you can avoid any issues of saying, well, we don't need to retroactively go back and do that.
Okay, thank you, Pam. All right, let's move on to speaking of actually making your documents and other instructional materials accessible. This is a question for Mindy, and it is, what would you consider some of the most important habits for faculty to develop when they are creating or fixing their online course materials?
Okay, so I think the most important, perhaps the most important habit for faculty is just to be aware and think about, is this accessible? When you're developing a document, when you're building an online course, when you're making a video, are you thinking, is this accessible? Or looking at a class that you've already developed, look at it and ask yourself, is it accessible? We haven't had this at the top of our list, but now we're really trying to prioritize this and make sure that all of our items are accessible. So that's the first step, is just always keep that in your mind. And of course, it's easier up front as you're building to have that accessibility knowledge up front as you're building, rather than to go back and try to do it afterwards. So it's easier to think that up front when you're developing your content. Other things, find out where your local support is at your colleges, or throughout the system. Find out who can help you if you have questions about how to make your content more accessible. Is it someone that's in disability services? Is it someone in academic services with distance learning? Find out where your local support is, so when you have questions, you know who to contact. Other habits, a lot of, especially when it comes to documents, a lot of Word and PowerPoint, they have an accessibility checker, and that's also, I believe, in the online mini course. Use that. That's a really good thing to get you going. That accessibility checker in there, built into Microsoft Office products anytime you're building a document. Also, keep your documents. One thing we mentioned, it is more difficult to edit or make a PDF accessible. But if you have the Word version, it simplifies things. So if you're building content and you want to save them as PDFs so that they're not editable so easily, also keep that Word document somewhere on a USB on your computer, somewhere in the cloud. Keep it in your OneDrive, just in case you need to go back and check it for accessibility or make edits to it. It's so much easier with that original document than editing a PDF. Other things, I use YouTube a lot because it has an auto captioning feature. If you make a lot of videos, make sure that you have some sort of captioning tool, or know how to use YouTube's auto captioning to make edits. It's not perfect, but it does a pretty good job, and you can edit it. What are some other things? Um, when you're making documents, and this is a lot, I know this is a lot, but just little tips. When you're making documents, copy and paste sometimes causes problems. So paste plain text into things like Word, or from Word to Blackboard. Pasting plain text can alleviate some of the problems with accessibility and when it comes to funky fonts and colors and things like that. So pasting plain text is just a little thing that I like to tell people to keep in mind with accessibility. But just to recap, the biggest things I can think of is just find out where your local support is and keep accessibility in mind anytime you're working with your online courses.
Thanks so much, Mindy. And John, we're going to hold that question about disclaimers until the Q&A. That's a really, really good question. And I am going to move on to, we've got another poll here, and this is actually 2 polls. And here we go. So the first one I'd like to know, and the options will be on the next slide, but, whoops, need to move that out of the way. Which of the habits outlined in the mini course do you already do? Some of these you'll see are things that Mindy mentioned, and then from there we'll go to the next one, which is which you find most challenging. But which of the 5 habits listed here do you already do? That would involve including alt text, using built-in headings and styles with your Word documents, using those accessibility checkers that Mindy mentioned when you're in Microsoft products, using descriptive text with your hyperlinks, and captioning your videos. So let me go ahead and give you the option here. And again, number 1 is alt text. Number 2 is built-in headings and styles with your Word documents. Number 3 is the built-in accessibility checkers in your Microsoft products. Number 4 is descriptive text. And number 5 is captioning videos. And Jennifer, I'm sorry, the way this poll is set up, oh, look at all of you, all of the above. That's awesome. I wish the poll was set up to do that. I'm limited to 5 choices at the max, so no, but it looks like we've got a ton of all of the above. That is great. Oh, look at everybody. Yes, awesome. All right, well, let's go on to the next poll, which is, actually, let me pull out of here, close this one. So the next one is a similar question, but it's just which one do you find the most challenging? And again, I'm going to put the exact same 5-choice poll up. Sorry, there's no all of the above for this one, but of the list that you have here, which ones do you all find challenging? And again, those options are alt text is number 1, built-in headings in your Word documents is number 2, number 3 is using the built-in accessibility checkers, number 4 is descriptive text in your hyperlinks, and number 5 is captioning videos. And it looks like the captioning videos is a strong contender for one that people find really challenging. And I will tell you, this is the one I have gotten some feedback in terms of both the mini course and just as I've been doing my needs assessment, that there is a lot of interest in captioning videos, making compliant videos. So you all can expect to see some additional, more in-depth PD on that specific topic. Because I agree, that is very, very challenging. And we've got right now...
Jenny's is a good one.
20, yes. And then, Jenny, your issue, your alt text with math is another one that I've gotten. You're not the only one who's told me that, and I've heard this a couple of times in the last week. So, and Dwight, Chad shared your email, and I very much concur with that with the alt text. So I'm looking into solutions for that. I am not an expert in ADA compliance in math, but I'm going to do my best to find someone who is, that can help us build some really good PD here in the very near future. I see that there's a real need for that.
No, Jenny, this is Paige. I agree. And I was talking to Pam. I said it's very difficult when you may have an image of some kind of problem, whether it's angles or whatever, and how to describe that without giving the answer away. So totally understand your concern there, and we will, as Kim said, definitely start looking into how to appropriately do that for the most, to be effective for students.
Okay, it looks like math, but it also just kind of looks like STEM in general. We've got some science lab issues, headings.
Scott, I was just curious, headings in tables and science lab write-ups. I don't know what that means exactly, because I'm just not sure what that means. Because if it's tables, they should be able to put headings on them. So I just want to make sure I understand your concern, Scott, so we can address it.
Okay, and while Scott is typing away, I'm going to move on to the next slide. And this one is for the whole group, and that is, what are some of the barriers we face in making our online materials accessible? And that's both for the panel and for the audience. So what's getting in the way of making your materials accessible?
So while people are typing, I'll jump in here and say that I think mostly we find a willingness among faculty and staff to try and do everything possible to make their content accessible. The problem, I think, is the confusion about what is accessible, what the law requires. So there's not a whole lot of clear-cut guidance out there always as to what is legally sufficient, like we were talking about earlier. I will tell you this, if you are doing a good faith effort to do all of these things, and it looks by the polling that you are, that will go a long way in defending any complaints we might get. That doesn't absolve us from our responsibilities, but it certainly shows that the intent to comply is there.
Thank you, Pam. Okay, so looking at the chat, it looks like time is a huge issue, and yeah, I couldn't agree more with that. This does take some time. I think some of that, as we do a little bit more focused PD on material creation, some of that, it's never going to go away. It's always going to be an issue, but we are really trying to address it in terms of helping faculty on the front end so they're not needing to go back on the back end and rectify issues that already exist. What else do we have on here? I'm reading through the chat right now. Too many materials to rectify, too little time. Third-party materials. That's another one that has come up in the past couple of weeks. It's been brought to my attention that I think we do need some additional, more in-depth PD in terms of choosing compliant materials, evaluating the quality of the materials. Okay, let's see. PJ says trying to offer interesting content, but limiting myself due to the time it takes to make content accessible. So just kind of almost that internal fight with yourself, because you want to do good stuff, but you also know that time is a limited resource. The ability to transfer non-electronic documents to accessible documents. I'm not totally sure what that one means. So would that be, for instance, paper copies that you're trying to convert to accessible documents? Barb, if you want to say a little bit more about that one. Okay, yeah. So doing that in a way where you end up with a compliant PDF as opposed to a scanned PDF. And then Tammy says the challenge is that trying to be compliant limits the instructor's diverse or alternative teaching methods to broaden the learning experience. And that's one where I think building in some more experience or opportunities for professional development in universal design would probably be helpful. So again, not necessarily a ton of answers here, but I'm definitely listening. We're all sitting and listening and really trying to round out the ways we can address these challenges, and obviously the most important thing is to have a good understanding of what the barriers are to start with. So thank you all very, very much for sharing that. I'm going to move to the next discussion, and this is specific to the audience. I would just like to know, when you want assistance in making your courses more accessible, where do you go currently to get advice or assistance? Okay, Jenny says to their marketing rep. Kate says online. Let's see. Maggie says DSS. Barbara's going online. Rita's going online to YouTube. Dwight's going to the librarian. So wow, you all are going to, Scott says he goes to Rita. So okay, it looks like this varies quite a bit depending on where you are in terms of where your resources are. James Gibson or James Hogan. My mini course from now on, thank you, Dwight. We'll be building that out. Actually, we probably won't be building that out. We'll be building out a more intensive course as well, as we get a better sense of what people need. Accessibility services is overwhelmed by taking care of the on-the-ground issues. So this kind of goes back to Mindy's suggestion to find your local resources and use them. It looks like you all are doing that. We are really going to be trying hard to round that picture out for you going forward. And so thank you for sharing that. And then that pretty much wraps up the discussion piece of this. We have a few minutes for Q&A before we wrap this up. I have a couple of other things to touch on, but in terms of Q&A, this is it. This is open to the panel. I want to go back to the first question. I'm scrolling through the chat right now because John had a really good question that we were saving, which is, are there disclaimers that we should put on our course if we are linking to a site that may have non-compliant PDFs or non-captioning, etc.? Are we obligated to let the student know that? That's a really good question, John.
And I'm assuming that the site is one that we do not control. So if it's a site that we do not control, I would try to find as many sites as possible that are as compliant as possible, but barring that, I would put a disclaimer on the website, on your course, whatever, indicating that these sites are not within our control and that you cannot say or declare, whatever word we would use, that everything on the site is compliant. That said, it won't really keep you from getting a complaint about it. So if you are providing sites that are non-compliant and those able-bodied students who don't have vision impairments or whatever it might be that causes them to not be able to access the information, they might complain about it. And so you need to make sure that you have an equal alternative, and that equal alternative is compliant and is timely provided. So the disclaimer is just like any other disclaimer. If you go skiing and the ski site tries to say, well, you know, we can't be responsible for anything that happens to you here, well, that's not exactly true. If they haven't kept their equipment up to date, etc., that liability disclaimer is no good. So your disclaimer will be no good if it's found that those particular sites are used over and over without trying to find something that might be compliant and able to be accessed.
Or provide that alternate.
Right.
Like Pam had said, because especially if it's a piece of the course, and even if it's an additional piece, oh, you want to learn more, here's this, everyone should have opportunity to take that next leap if they want. So that's a great question, John. And I was going to say I completely agree with Pam, but Pam is the
You better.
but Pam is the official one. So
and we can
yeah.
help you with disclaimers if you want, but again, I would say to try and limit those non-compliant sites as much as possible. That's not to say, because a lot of people will say, well, I'm just not going to even provide that information. It's out there. That information in some sort of compliant form that you want your students to have access to, find it and try to use that as much as possible. But otherwise, we are more than happy to help with disclaimers if you find a site that you think is vital to your students and you would like to provide.
Okay, Barb has a question. How can you tell if a third-party site is accessible?
I'm not sure I'm the one to answer that.
There are websites out there that you can put a website in and have it go tell you. I don't have it off the top of my head. James, do you know that off the top of your head? I know there are some out there.
No, I do not. Some of
We'll find that.
Yeah, some of our larger vendors will actually have the standards that they support. So I wish some of the smaller vendors do not, but some of the larger vendors like McGraw-Hill and Pearson do have that information out there that we can search for.
Okay, that looks like one I'm writing down for further investigation, and then we'll push that out to you all.
So I see that John is worried about other faculty, and I understand that. I keep coming back to this good faith effort because there is so much confusion out there, there is so much information out there, there is so much that is either compliant or non-compliant. So let's say I'm building my course and I put in a couple of links that end up not being compliant. So I have 5 links that are, 3 that are not. That shows that you didn't have any sort of intent, in my belief, to say, well, I'm just not going to comply with this. I found this good information and I want it out there. So I think you're fine as far as that goes. I don't want anybody to say, well, I'm worried about getting a complaint against me, so I'm not going to provide anything but the most basic information for my students. But the fact of the matter is that there are actually, believe it or not, some faculty who don't want to comply, who don't think that they should comply, and are not going to comply. And that may be staff as well, so I don't want to pick on faculty. But we're talking about courses. That is an intent to be non-compliant, and that's the thing that we can't defend. We can defend all of you who are out there earnestly trying to do the best for your students. Those who believe that the law is, confusing or dumb, or I'm not going to comply with this, that's where we have a hard time defending. So I guess what I'm trying to say is legal has your back as long as you're putting in the effort. And I think most everyone here probably is, because they're here in this webinar. So
Thank you, Pam. And John says, yes, it very much is an uphill battle sometimes. Okay, so calls to action. We are down to just a couple more minutes, and I have to give you all some information about upcoming events, ask you to fill out a survey. So right now, there are some specific calls to action. We are going to ask you all to do one or more of these things. moving forward. And like I mentioned at the beginning of the webinar, I will be following up and checking in with you all just to see what happened, what you did, and what worked, what didn't. So visit the mini course if you haven't yet done so. Everyone should have gotten the link to that. It's both in the chat right now, thank you, Chad, and it was also in your registration for the webinar itself. So check that out. There's a lot of good information in there. And then log on to your course, click on an ally indicator, and see what happens. Just kind of check that out, do some exploring. Pick one pro accessibility habit to incorporate from here on out. Those are listed in the mini course, or you can find one of your own and pick that to do. Spread the word, tell a colleague. One really good way to get information out about these tools is obviously just to tell one another about it. I had a meeting just the other day where I mentioned Ally to a colleague, and they didn't know that it existed or how it worked, and I just jumped onto a course and showed them, you know, how great it is and how helpful it can be. And so I think word of mouth and people being willing to just share that information can be really non-threatening, and that's a really good way to help people pick up those habits. Okay, so I am going to ask you to fill out a brief evaluation. I put the link to it in the chat. This will take you just a couple of minutes, and it's just really, really helpful to me. As I mentioned, I am new on the job. I've got a lot of ideas and a lot of need to focus on what's going to be most helpful to you all. So I really, really value your feedback. Kate, yes, the mini course will continue to be available at this link for the time being. I don't really have, this is still kind of in beta form, and I don't really have a final solution in terms of where it's going to live. We're still trying to figure out whether these materials would be best in Blackboard or whether they'd be best on the intranet, on an info center. But for now, it will be there. Any additions I make will be in a backup course. So the one that's still live right now will be the one that you all saw. So, yes. Finally, continuing the cool theme here, we've got a few upcoming events. These registrations will be going up probably within the next few days. You'll see these in your Blackboard emails, and they'll be in the KCTCS scoop. This webinar will be repeated on March 21st and on April 16th. We've got our great panel coming back for that. It will pretty much cover the same material, so you don't necessarily need to join us again if you're here today. If you want to, you are certainly more than welcome, but please tell your colleagues. Let's get the word out. They will also get access to the mini course when they register for this. We have the Cool Conference coming up on April 12th at Hazard Community and Technical College. One of our wonderful panelists, Mindy, will be presenting, actually two, because James will be presenting as well. James and Mindy will be doing sessions on ADA compliance. We also have tracks in teaching and learning, instructional design, tech tools, tips, and tricks. So we hope you all can meet us for this, for that conference in April. There will be another Cool Conference for those of you who can't make it all the way to the eastern part of the state on November 8th at West Kentucky Community and Technical College. So hope to see you there. I really appreciate seeing you all here today. Again, please don't forget to fill out that survey. I'm going to throw that link out one more time just so you have it. And then let me see if Chad has anything to add.
Yeah, just a few more things before we end the session. So hopefully later today, if not, it'll be tomorrow, an email will go out with a link to the recording of this session, as well as I'll include the link to the survey that Kim has as well in that email. Also, too, the 2 webinars in March and April that she mentioned, if you have questions that you didn't think of, stockpile them and join us on that session, and we'll answer those at that point in time, too. Feel free to join in again. As for this will, when I mark everybody as who attended, you will receive an email from the PD tracker. Make sure you go to that link and fill in what you learned today, so that will automatically go to your MyPD. It won't go into MyPD unless you fill that out. Hopefully, like I said, that will be sent as soon as I mark you as attended. So if you don't receive it today, you will receive it tomorrow. And on that note, I guess we're ready to wrap up. Thanks again for everyone who attended, and we will see you again soon.
Thanks, everyone.
Bye.
Bye-bye.